In the middle of a live meeting in Congress, Karoline Leavitt quietly said, "Go back to Africa," under her breath. She didn't know her microphone was still on. But what Jasmine Crockett did next made the whole room go very quiet. Everyone watching across America couldn't believe it. Inside the Kansas state capitol, the air felt dry and heavy. People shuffled papers, clicked their pens, and whispered. You could feel that the meeting had gone on too long and people were tired and upset. It was like dust was sticking to their jackets. The meeting was about school rules and lasted more than 3 hours. People were losing their tempers. Representative Jasmine Crockett, wearing a bright blue blazer, sat calmly. She hadn't talked for a while, not because she didn't have anything to say, but because she was waiting for the right time. She always chose her moments carefully. Across from her sat Karoline Leavitt. She used to be on TV talking about politics. Now she was an important helper for the government about schools. She was sharp with her words, very ambitious, and didn't like to lose. Today, she looked upset and nervous. Being challenged by a strong black woman made her uncomfortable. When Jasmine finally spoke, her voice was firm but calm. "So what you're saying," Jasmine said while looking at Karoline, "is that schools in poor areas just aren't trying hard enough?" Karoline crossed her arms and moved in her seat. "I'm saying rules have to be the same for everyone. No excuses," she said. "But the board was never even," Jasmine said back, keeping her voice steady. "We can't talk about fairness if we don't talk about history. We have to think about where people start from." Karoline made a soft scoffing sound. She thought no one would hear. But her microphone was still on. That's when it happened. She leaned a little to the side, close to her microphone but not right in it. She mumbled, but it came out clear through the speakers for everyone to hear. She should just go back to Africa. There was a short, awkward silence. Someone coughed. Papers rustled. A throat tightened in the back of the room. At first, not everyone understood what had happened. But a black intern near the media table heard it. He sat up straight and turned his head toward Karoline. C-SPAN, the channel showing the meeting live on TV, caught everything. A few people looked at Jasmine, wondering if she would stand up and yell. But she didn't. Jasmine stayed calm. She kept her hands folded. She blinked slowly and just waited. The leader of the meeting, an older man from Idaho, coughed and said, "Let's stay on topic, please." Karoline didn't move. She reached for her water bottle and took a sip, pretending like nothing happened. But her ears turned red. She realized the microphone had picked up her words. Outside the room, reporters were already clipping the video and sharing it online. People on social media were watching the video over and over. Within 20 minutes, "Go back to Africa" was the #1 trending topic in the country. People were sharing it everywhere. They added hashtags, slowed down the video, and talked about every little moment. Karoline's team knew they were in big trouble. When they left the room, her helper Evan walked fast beside her. "We have to say it was a mistake," he whispered. He tried to protect her from all the cameras waiting outside. "I mumbled," Karoline said. "Nobody knows exactly what I said. But she was wrong." People knew. It was clear and sharp. You could hear the anger in her voice. They went into a staff hallway. Karoline pulled out her phone. It was full of messages from friends and co-workers. Some were mad. Some warned her. But no one defended her. They had to write a statement quickly. When her team sent out the first message, it said, "Miss Leavitt was misunderstood because of background noise. She stands against racism." But the public had already made up their mind. People weren't just mad. They were tired. They had seen this kind of excuse before. Bad behavior, then pretending it didn't happen. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett still said nothing. Reporters followed her to the elevator. One asked, "Congresswoman, do you want to respond to Miss Leavitt's comment?" Jasmine pressed the elevator button and said calmly, "Well, not yet." That small answer made a big impact. Her supporters said it showed she was wise. Her critics said it was part of a plan. Later that evening, Jasmine stayed at her hotel. She wasn't doing interviews or making big speeches. She had dinner with her mother, who had flown in from Texarkana to be with her. They ate quietly for a while. Then her mother said, "You're going to say something." Jasmine looked out the window at the city lights. "Yes," she said, "but it won't be what they are expecting." Meanwhile, Karoline couldn't sleep. She sat on her hotel bed, watching the news repeat the video again and again. Her phone buzzed with calls from donors and old friends. Some told her to disappear for a while. Some said sorry. But Karoline didn't feel sorry yet. "She misunderstood me," Karoline said to herself again. Across the room, Evan sat quietly. He didn't argue. He just looked worried. It wasn't just about Karoline's career anymore. It was bigger now. Karoline was starting to realize she wasn't in control of the story anymore. Sometimes, power changes when you don't expect it. And Jasmine was getting ready to take control in a way no one could see coming. The next morning, the cafeteria inside the Capitol was very quiet. Cameras lined up in the hallway. Reporters held coffee and looked at their phones. They could feel something big was about to happen. At exactly 10 a.m., Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett walked to the podium. She was alone. No team. No fancy background. No big speech. She carried only a small black folder and had the same calm feeling she had the day before. The cameras clicked as soon as she stepped up. She waited just a second. Not too long. Just enough for everyone to pay attention. Then she opened her folder, looked at the paper once, and closed it. "I was going to read something prepared," she said, "but I don't think I need to." She leaned closer to the microphone. "What happened yesterday wasn't new to me," she said. Her voice didn't shake. She didn't try to sound angry or sad. She just spoke clearly. "I've been told to go back since I was a teenager in a store in Shreveport," she said. "Back then, it was an older woman who didn't like that I looked her in the eye. I've heard it on airplanes. I've heard it whispered in elevators. I've even heard it in boardrooms, though people say it's nicer there." She paused. Some reporters moved in their chairs. "What shocked me," she said, "was that some people thought I should be shocked. Like it was the first time something like this ever happened. Like the world usually runs on respect." She shook her head a little. "That's not the country I've known." The room stayed silent. No cameras clicked now. Everyone just listened. "I want people to understand something," she said. "When you tell someone to go back, you aren't just questioning if they are a citizen. You are questioning if they belong here, if they matter, if they have a right to sit at the table." She looked right into the camera. "And I'm not going anywhere." That was the line that made 1,000 screens light up all over America. It showed up in classrooms, in barbershops, and on back porches in small towns where people didn't even know Jasmine Crockett before, but they knew that feeling. They understood that strength. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She just told her story. "One year, my father took me to Washington, D.C. We stood outside the Supreme Court. He told me, 'This building belongs to you too.'" She smiled softly. "I was 11. I didn't believe him. I still have days when I don't believe it. But I came here anyway. I ran for office anyway. I stand here anyway. Not because I was invited, but because I didn't need anyone's permission." Her words weren't polished. They weren't practicing. They were real. "I'm not here to shame Karoline Leavitt," she said. I'm here to remind everyone that you don't have to be perfect to belong. We belong because we are human. Because we wake up here, fight here, build here, love here. We belong because our ancestors made this place possible." She took a deep breath. "And if that makes someone so uncomfortable that they say something ugly," she said, "maybe they need to sit with that discomfort, not me." And then she finished. She didn't take any questions. She closed her folder, stepped away from the podium, and walked out. It looked like she had something more important to do than keep arguing, and she did. Her phone started ringing just a few seconds later. Some people were crying, some were cheering, and even some people who didn't usually agree with her sent messages. They wrote things like, "You said what I couldn't say out loud." But not everyone was happy. Some people were getting ready to fight back against everything Jasmine stood for. By lunchtime, Jasmine's words were everywhere. They were on all the websites and apps people cared about. Millions of people watched the video clip before they even ate lunch. Some people watched it more than once, not because they missed it, but because it made them feel strong. All over the country, people started talking, not with just short slogans or hashtags, but by telling their own stories, by using their real voices. In a small diner outside Toledo, Ohio, an older black man named Walter sat at his usual booth. He leaned over his coffee and told the waitress, "I didn't even know her name before, but now I know she has steel in her spine." In Flagstaff, Arizona, a Navajo high school teacher stopped her lesson. She showed the video to her students and let them sit in silence. Then she said, "That's how you carry yourself when someone tries to knock you down." In Fresno, California, a retired white soldier named Frank got on Facebook for the first time in a year. He posted just one sentence, "She spoke for more than just herself." But not everyone felt that way. On conservative radio shows, the hosts were already saying mean things. One radio host in Des Moines yelled into the microphone, "This is just another trick to make people feel bad and divide us. She's showing off." Callers called in. Some agreed. Some fought back. One caller said, "She didn't throw a tantrum. She told the truth. If you don't like how it sounds, maybe you should ask yourself why." Karoline stayed quiet. Her team sent out another statement. It was longer and sounded more polished. They said sorry if her words were misunderstood, but they didn't really say she was wrong. People on the internet tore it apart. That night, Karoline paced inside a dark townhouse in Arlington, Virginia. She didn't turn on any lights. She watched the video again. Jasmine's words, her calm, her strength, it all made Karoline mutter, "She's winning this." Her helper Evan nodded across the kitchen. "You're not going to get out of this one," he said. "I didn't mean it like that," Karoline whispered. "It just slipped." Evan leaned on the counter. "That's the problem," he said. Meanwhile, Jasmine's words kept spreading. On a college campus in Madison, Wisconsin, students packed an auditorium. They had come for a different event, but they ended up talking about identity, belonging, and who gets to feel at home in America. Jasmine's speech played again and again between speakers. In a barbershop in Mobile, Alabama, older men stopped cutting hair to talk about Jasmine. One man said, "Back in my day, you either got loud or threw punches. She did neither. That takes real strength." But all of this was hard for Jasmine too. She sat alone in her apartment with the lights low. She held a glass of water in her hand. She didn't turn on the news. She didn't want to hear her name said by people who didn't understand the kind of heavy silence she carried that day. Her phone buzzed again. It was a message from someone she never thought would text her, Senator Claire Weston, a conservative from Texas. The message was short. That was powerful. "Would you like to meet?" Jasmine stared at her phone. She wasn't surprised. But the world felt heavier. People were listening now. Even people who never listened before. But one important person still hadn't said anything yet. And when she finally did, it changed everything. In the middle of a live hearing, Karoline Leavitt muttered, "Go back to Africa," under her breath. She didn't know her microphone was still on. But what Jasmine said after that left everyone silent and made all of America watch. Inside the Kansas state capitol, the air felt dry and full of tension. People shuffled papers, clicked pens, and whispered under their breath. The hearing had gone too long and gotten too personal. You could feel how tense it was, like dust sticking to people's jackets. The hearing was about education policies. It was in its third hour. People were getting tired and upset. Representative Jasmine Crockett sat tall in her blue blazer. She had been quiet for most of the session, not because she didn't have anything to say, but because she was waiting for the right moment. Across from her sat Karoline Leavitt. She used to be on TV. Now she worked on education reform. She was smart, sharp, and didn't like being challenged, especially by a black woman like Jasmine who carried herself with strength. Today, Karoline looked upset and defensive. When Jasmine finally spoke, her voice was firm but calm. "So what you're suggesting," Jasmine said, looking right at Karoline, "is that schools in poor areas just aren't trying hard enough?" Karoline crossed her arms. "I'm saying rules have to be the same for everyone," she answered. "But the starting line was never the same," Jasmine said, keeping her voice steady. "We can't talk about fairness without talking about access. History matters." Karoline scoffed. She didn't notice her microphone was still on. She leaned a little to her left and muttered, "She should just go back to Africa." It was quiet for a moment. Someone coughed. Someone shuffled a paper. At first, no one seemed to realize what happened, until a young black intern at the media table stiffened and turned his head slowly. The C-SPAN feed was live. Everyone at home heard it. People looked at Jasmine, expecting her to stand up and shout. But she didn't. She kept her hands folded. She blinked slowly. She waited. The chairperson of the subcommittee cleared his throat. "Let's stay on topic, please," he said. Karoline grabbed her water bottle and drank like nothing had happened. But her ears were red. She knew then the microphone had caught her. Outside the room, the clip was already being shared everywhere. Inside, Jasmine looked right at Karoline. Not angry. Not sad. Just steady. It was the kind of look that said, "You didn't hurt me. You just showed everyone who you are." Still, Jasmine didn't yell. She turned to her notepad, made one small note, and let the hearing continue like normal. Those few seconds said more than any speech could. But silence doesn't stay silent when a microphone is on and the country is listening. A week went by, but people were still talking. Truck drivers talked about it on the radio in Wichita. Teenagers talked about it in group chats in Eugene, Oregon. The moment opened up something bigger. It wasn't just about race. It was about respect. About who gets listened to. On TV shows, experts talked about Jasmine's calmness, Karoline's apology, and everything in between. Some people said it was a masterclass in grace under pressure. Others said Jasmine let Karoline off too easily. One late-night show host said, "She didn't yell. She didn't make a scene. That's what made it hit harder." In Birmingham, a civil rights activist named Tanya Freeman went live on social media. She said, "This isn't just about words. It's about the meaning behind them. An apology doesn't fix anything if people don't change." Meanwhile, in her quiet office, Jasmine read handwritten letters. Hundreds of them. One letter caught her eye. It was from a fifth-grade girl in Boise, Idaho. She had drawn a picture of Jasmine standing at a tall desk with the words, "You talk like my mom." Jasmine looked calm but strong. Jasmine kept that picture on her desk. She liked it. But she knew that people can give you praise and then take it away just as fast. Later that week, Jasmine talked to a small group of interns. There were no cameras and no fancy papers. She told them, "Don't try to become super famous. Try to keep moving forward. This town will eat up the person who talks the loudest. You win by being steady, honest, and real." Karoline, on the other hand, was still having a hard time. Even though she had said sorry, some people were still upset with her. At one of her events in Sioux Falls, people showed up with signs that said, "Words have weight." That night, in her hotel room, Karoline stood in front of the mirror wiping off her makeup. She looked very tired. Evan, her helper, sat by the window, looking at news on his phone. "Are you going to keep doing interviews?" he asked. Karoline shook her head. "No," she said. "I think I need to listen and learn before I talk again." She wasn't giving up. It was something different. Maybe it was her starting to understand. Maybe it was just the truth hitting her. Either way, she seemed changed, not fully new, but different. The news soon moved on to other things, like it always does. A big scandal in another state took over the news. People started talking about that instead. But something from Jasmine's moment stayed, not on the front pages, but in homes, in office lunchrooms, and in small talks. People would say, "Did you see that speech?" And others would nod and say, "Yeah, she said it the way it needed to be said." At the airport in Santa Fe, a woman who worked for TSA, the people who check bags, stopped Jasmine softly. She said, "You showed us what real power looks like when it's quiet." Jasmine smiled and said, "Thank you. I didn't think it would reach this far." The woman nodded. It did. Not every story ends with fireworks and loud cheers. Sometimes it's the quiet after the storm that stays in people's hearts. But even quiet can be powerful, if people are ready to sit with it and think about what they are learning. 2 months later, everything looked normal again. Congress was busy. The news was full of talk about midterm elections, border laws, and scandals. But underneath all the noise, something had changed. In Charleston, South Carolina, a civics teacher started her fall class in a new way. Instead of starting with the Constitution, she showed her students a video of Jasmine's speech. Then she asked, "What does it mean to belong?" A student in the back raised her hand and said, "It means you don't have to explain why you're here." The teacher kept thinking about that answer. Back in Washington, D.C., Jasmine Crockett didn't suddenly become super famous. She wasn't on magazine covers or writing books. But more young people wanted to work for her, not because she shouted the loudest, but because she said something that stayed in people's hearts. She noticed that people in the halls nodded at her now. People who never talked to her before now smiled. One congressman from Frankings, Montana, stopped her and said, "You didn't just stand up for yourself. You stood up for a lot of people who never get a chance to speak." Jasmine smiled. That was the point. As for Karoline Leavitt, she stayed out of the spotlight. She didn't do interviews. No book tours. No podcasts. No crying on TV. She just worked, quietly and steadily. She met with groups behind closed doors. She listened. It wasn't for show. It was real. In one meeting in Columbus, Ohio, a college student asked her, "What changed you?" Karoline didn't lie. She said, "Getting caught didn't change me. Getting challenged did. And I'm still trying to figure out what that means." Nobody clapped. They didn't need to. That wasn't the point. Later that fall, a quiet vote passed on a franc to make school funding fairer. Jasmine helped write it. Karoline voted for it too. They didn't take pictures together. They didn't make a big show. But they voted the same way. It wasn't flashy, and it didn't make the news. But for people who were watching closely, it mattered. What happened that day wasn't just about a comment. It was about who we choose to be when things get hard. Jasmine didn't come out of it with more fame. She came out of it with more power behind her words, the kind that stays even when the cameras are off. And Karoline didn't become a villain. She packed her things, left the stage, and went to do real work. When Jasmine finished her speech that day, her phone wouldn't stop ringing. Some people were crying. Some were cheering. Even some people from the opposite side of politics were texting her, saying, "You said what I couldn't say out loud." But not everyone was happy. Some people were already planning a backlash to try to tear her down. Still, millions of people watched Jasmine's speech online. Some people played it again and again, not because they missed it, but because they needed to feel it again. Across the country, people responded in ways you don't see often anymore. Not with hashtags, not with slogans, but with real stories and real voices. In a small diner near Toledo, Ohio, an older black man named Walter sat at his usual booth. He leaned over his coffee and said to the waitress, "I didn't even know her name before this, but now, that woman's got steel in her spine." In Flagstaff, Arizona, a Navajo high school teacher stopped her lesson, showed Jasmine's speech to her students, and let them sit in silence. Then she said, "That's how you stay strong when someone tries to hurt you." In Fresno, California, a retired white veteran named Frank went back on Facebook for the first time in a year. He posted just one sentence: "She spoke for more than just herself." But not everyone felt the same. On conservative radio, some people said Jasmine was just playing the victim or trying to divide us. Some listeners agreed. Others pushed back. One caller said, "She didn't throw a fit. She told the truth. If you don't like it, maybe you should ask yourself why." Karoline stayed quiet. Her team sent out a longer, fancier statement, saying sorry if her words were misunderstood, but not really admitting she was wrong. The internet ripped the statement apart. That night, Karoline walked back and forth in a borrowed townhouse in Arlington, Virginia. The lights were off. She watched the clip of Jasmine again, her calm, her fire. Karoline whispered, "She's winning this." Evan, her helper, nodded from the kitchen. "You're not going to spin out of this. Not this one." "I didn't mean it like that," Karoline said quietly. "It just slipped." Evan leaned on the counter and said, "That's the problem." Meanwhile, the impact of Jasmine's speech kept growing. At a college in Madison, Wisconsin, students filled a whole auditorium. They had come for a different panel, but instead, they ended up talking about identity, belonging, and what it means to feel at home in America. Jasmine's speech played on a loop. In a barbershop in Mobile, Alabama, old men stopped their haircuts to talk about Jasmine. One said, "Back in my day, you either yelled or fought. She didn't do either. That takes real strength." But the moment was also heavy for Jasmine. She sat alone in her apartment with the lights off, just holding a glass of water. She didn't turn on the news. She didn't want to hear strangers talk about her who didn't understand what it really felt like. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Senator Claire Weston, a conservative from Texas. The message was short, that was powerful. "Would you like to meet?" Jasmine stared at the screen. She wasn't surprised. She just felt the weight of everything. Her words had made people listen, even people who had never spoken to her before. But one person still hadn't said anything. And when she finally did, it would change everything. In the middle of a live hearing, Karoline Leavitt muttered under her breath, "Go back to Africa." She didn't know her microphone was on. But what Jasmine Crockett said next left the whole room silent, and America was watching. The air inside the Kansas state capitol was dry and buzzing. People were fidgeting, scribbling notes, whispering. You could feel the tension. It stuck to your clothes like dust. The congressional hearing on education had dragged into its third hour. People were getting tired and cranky. Representative Jasmine Crockett, wearing a blue blazer, had been very quiet for the last part, not because she had nothing to say, but because she was waiting. If you liked this story, tell me in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more fun adventures and mysteries. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.